If you've been wondering what's the right therapy for me, what's going to be the thing that's most effective in healing my trauma, taking away my anxiety or depression, helping me have better relationships, or right now maybe you're in therapy and you just don't seem to be getting the results that you want. In this video, I'm going to share with you the top 5 trauma therapies I wish I knew first. Hi, my name is John Hawkins Jr. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, certified trauma specialist, and co-founder of Hawkins Counseling Center with my wife, Basan Hawkins. And when I started as a therapist, there's tons of therapies out there, and there's everything from neurofeedback to biofeedback to cognitive behavior, all these different kind of therapies. And so for clients, patients, whatever you refer to yourself as, it can be a real struggle trying to find, you don't know, I just know I want to get better. And so you kind of bounce from this approach to that approach. Some things resonate, some don't. Many things are going to have some positive benefit. What I've discovered after years of working with thousands of clients, that if you don't do what's referred to as experiential therapies that actually work with the brain, the nervous system, to create what's called neuroplasticity and really clear out these implicit memory networks, which I talk about ad nauseum all the time, then you're not going to get the results you want. You're going to get some benefit, but it's just not going to get you there. Maybe the symptoms just keep coming back. So these are my big 5. I do all 5 of these therapies. I'm going to give them to you in order of how much I use them. From the number 1 would be the most, and the 5 the least, even though it's a great therapy, just what I have found for me personally and my clients, how to integrate these big 5. And I'm also going to give you some resources where you can explore these therapies more, get web links where you could go to some of their sites and learn more about the therapy from the developers as well. So number 5 is somatic experiencing. This was developed by Dr. Peter Levine, and he has done a great job of really understanding all these primitive defenses we have and how the brain, when it cannot bear overwhelming experience or dysregulated energy, how it will cause damage to the brain. So we have this primitive defense of disassociation, which he talks about. The animal parallels tonic immobility. So when animals go into this collapsed state, and it's their last line of defense against a predator. There's a bunch of different reasons I won't go into in this video, but it's really fascinating stuff, and there's videos you can watch on all these things. If it gets it goes into this catatonic state, kind of play possum, so to speak. If it has a chance to escape, it will activate its adrenaline and fight or flight networks, and it'll flee to safety. And then, as my clients always laugh at me when I do this display, once they're free, they'll just walk around and shake for 5, 10, 15, whatever minute amount of time to get that energy back out of their system that they didn't use, and then their neural circuitry will just reset itself. The humans, we have this problem because we have this big neocortex, and so it blocks, we overthink everything, we analyze everything, which in some contexts is good, but it prevents our body from going through this natural intuitive process of reactivating this energy and discharging it. So he has developed this therapeutic approach called somatic experiencing that's a very soft way to go into trauma, where you reactivate some of these neural networks or implicit memories. Then in a very controlled way, or what he calls pendulation, he might have you access more positive networks, and you can kind of bounce back and forth to regulate yourself or some other somatic resources, as they're called. And it's a really powerful therapy. He's got some great works that are very accessible to the general public reader. One's called Waking the Tiger. It kind of goes into how he developed somatic experiencing in an unspoken voice. If you really want to understand trauma and memory, he's got a book called Trauma and Memory. If you have been through developmental trauma as a child, or you were in contact with children who've gone through trauma, he's got a great book called Trauma Through a Child's Eyes. And there's more that he's written, papers, some other additional books, but if you read those books, you're going to have a ton of knowledge about how to heal trauma. I would also say honorable mention is sensory motor psychotherapy by Pat Ogden, which has some of the same things, but also uses the body's movement to access these networks, in addition to just positions, how they're linked with emotions, cognition, all these kind of things. Both of those are great therapies. My next one is EMDR. EMDR has been around probably for over 40 years now. It's the most researched psychotherapy in history. When I first heard about it, I thought it was crazy. There's no way, that sounds kooky to me. But like I said, there's so much scientific validity. That was developed by Dr. Francine Shapiro. Her book, Eye Movement and Desensitization Reprocessing Therapy, lays out the whole model in her work. That's what EMDR stands for. What she kind of accidentally discovered, and you can read her story, was how to access what we're doing during REM sleep. They were doing some sleep research studies, and when she started getting curious, she got a lot of different researchers to collaborate. And when we go into REM sleep, our body goes into a different brainwave state. I mean, our brain goes into a different brainwave state, and things get much slower. Your brain produces images, and where it sees images, it doesn't differentiate internal and external reality. So then your eyes start moving bilaterally, back and forth, right, left, different locations, to activate both hemispheres of the brain and trigger the energy we're still holding in our body to clear that out. So she's developed a protocol, and that's been extended by many other either EMDR therapists for a lot of different things like addiction and phobias and all kinds of things. Really awesome therapy for single incident traumas. You would take something like, this is an actual case I had where a woman got in an auto accident and she couldn't drive now. Every time she tries to get in her car, she has a panic attack. So when we talk about the disassociation, how it's split off, now it's stored in her body in implicit memory. Obviously the getting in a car is a pretty big parallel to the accident. So this went on for 6 months. She went to talk therapy, made a little headway, but was getting really depressed now because she couldn't drive for the last 6 months. And so her therapist, who I know is a great person, very supportive, referred her to me, and she came in. I had her focus on an image of the accident. Where do you feel that in your body? For her, it was in the chest, roughly on a 0 to 10. How much do you feel it? A 6. And then what we start doing, whether it's through just tracking my fingers, a pointer, you can use auditory or tactile paddles to create this bilateral stimulation. We just start doing sets of eye movements. That's what the EM's for. And then we just let it go wherever it goes. What are you feeling in your body? What do you notice mentally right now? Could be nothing, black, other memories, memories of the accident, other traumas, other different things that never got processed. She left at the end of that one session, drove her car home. She had a friend drive her there, came back, and probably 3 or 4 times got business cards to give out to the people she knows. That's how rapid and powerful these kind of therapies can be, and they're way beyond talking. The third one is brain spotting, developed by Dr. David Grand, who was a well-known EMDR therapist. And then instead of doing the bilateral movement, what he discovered was certain locations, the brain would hold things by eye positions. So he was working with, he does a lot of performance work. He's in New York City, works with trauma, but also actors, professional athletes. He was working with a figure skater for about 1.5 years doing EMDR, and they've done a ton of therapy. She elevated her performance, got through a lot of these blocks, but she had this one issue where she could not do a triple axel in competition. She got to the point where she could do it in practice, but not competition. So he noticed as he was coming across with the eye moments that her eyes froze, and he just stayed there, right where her eyes were. And all this stuff that had never come up in therapy before came up. And within the next 2 sessions, I believe it was in this book, Brain Spotting, that was cleared. She was able to start doing the triple axels. So brain spotting, I would say, is a little faster and, in my opinion, somewhat deeper than EMDR, even though EMDR is great. So it just depends for me how I'm using these therapies based on the client's need in the moment. But all these can also be very slowed down, and we want to do things in a very controlled, regulated, calm way. Trauma therapy is not about intensity. It's not having these big breakdowns and stuff like that. So that's another factor with these therapies, is we can really control what's happening in the brain and nervous system to go at a pace that's not overwhelming. So again, all 3 of these therapies are great. It's one of my top therapies, and that's AEDP. It stands for Accelerated Experiential Dynamic Psychotherapy. That's why we say AEDP. So this therapy is very focused in attachment theory, emotion theory, neuroscience, neurobiology, what we call psychodynamic defense work, ways we block certain emotions because they're overwhelming. It's probably the most comprehensive therapy, in my opinion, that exists. So what would happen is a client would come in and you would start to notice their presenting issue or complaints, and then how they, as you're conversing and exploring with them, how they start using different defenses to block their emotions. So an example for me would be, a client comes in and says they're depressed. but I don't know why I'm depressed. There's no reason to be depressed. And so my first thought in my head is, apparently there is, because you are. So I start just asking them questions. I have no idea. My number one resource in therapy is just curiosity. And so you can be curious about yourself, just really get curious. So I started asking, and then as we're talking for 5 minutes, I'm just exploring with her, things like, when did these symptoms start? How long have you had them? How do they manifest themselves? And I noticed the first time she talked about her husband being very demeaning to her, and she rationalized for him. The second time she talked about, again, her relationship where she was getting disrespected and she beat herself up. And I said, do you notice twice now when you talked about your husband being so kind of demeaning or shaming to you? The first time you rationalized for him, the second time you self-attacked. Are you aware that you do that? And the client may say no, or yeah, I guess you're right, or yeah, I know I do that. And so if you're beating yourself up, you're gonna get depressed. If you're just absorbing shame, the emotion, this is where emotion theory really comes in evolutionary psychology. So I know part of her, even though she's gonna feel hurt, like sadness, shame, there should be some healthy anger showing up there to be assertive, to say, I'm not gonna tolerate being treated that way. It's an internal resource, our core emotions. So I know somewhere in her history, it was very unsafe to feel angry, that she had to block anger, and that was really adaptive to do. But now at 40 years old, not so much. She's getting walked all over, she's passive, conflict avoidant, and this creates all these other relationship problems. But maybe if she goes to get assertive, she shrinks and disassociates to a 6-year-old girl, and it's really hard to be assertive from a terrified 6-year-old girl. So in ADP, what we're doing is saying, okay, there was this overwhelming emotion the client couldn't regulate at some point in their history, so they had to use defenses which were adaptive in that moment to block it. But they're cut off from these internal resources, and that's causing all kinds of deficits and impairment in their daily life now. So I have to help them get connected to that feeling, help them turn away from the defenses they're using, calm their anxiety so they can feel that emotion through to completion. So when we are, developing, we have this potential to do that, but we don't have the ability. It has to be internalized through someone else, called co-regulation. So the therapist in that case is the attachment figure to help the client co-regulate. So I would say ADP is like one of my favorite, most powerful therapies on number 2. If you want to learn more about ADP, it was developed by a woman named Diana Fosha, and the book is called The Transforming Power of Affect, AFFECT. So in therapy we call affect is another kind of synonym for the word emotions, but it's your physical markers and manifestations of your emotions. But that's a great book. It's really for clinicians. They do have some client books now. Eileen Russell wrote one called Restoring Resilience that's a little more digestible, but I have clients that love to get into the clinical as deep as any therapist, so that Transforming Power of Affect, have at it, an incredible book. Number 1, just edging out, but I integrate these first 1 and 2, my top therapies, so it's almost, I hate to say 1 or 2. They're both number 1 for me because I integrate them together, but the number 1 I would say is internal family systems. Internal family systems was developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz, who was a marriage and family therapist. Like many of us who work with people consistently, he noticed that people have parts, that multiplicity is the human experience, that you have all these different neural networks in your brain. So he started noticing there was these parts of people that were carrying different wounds, or what they refer to as burdens. Things like shame or abandonment or overwhelming grief or powerlessness, states of terror, things that we disassociated or blocked because they were too much for us. So we developed other patterns of behavior, or in IFS terms, parts, to manage and protect those other parts. So I might have a part of me that feels really inadequate or unworthy based on some things that happened to me when I was younger, and then I develop a perfectionistic, high-achieving part of my personality structure. That way, if I can be perfect and I can always achieve, at this high level, I never have to feel inadequate. But that's impossible to always do. So maybe when I can do that, another part of me rushes out after work, goes to happy hour, or fires up a joint, or goes home and eats a ton of ice cream to calm all that shame back down. Or maybe I had a traumatic loss and I was never able to deal with the grief. And so now I have a part of me that pushes other people away, won't let them get close to me. And so the other thing that he started to notice was, as he was working with clients and they would talk about their parts or see them spontaneously in their mind's eye, as he would be able to progress with these parts and get to know them without judgment, this other thing would emerge that he ended up defining as self, or your core self. It's been talked about for thousands of years in spiritual terms, which you don't have to believe anything spiritually to access these things. But this thing would just come in and then take over and start healing these wounded parts, working with these other parts. And he wasn't doing anything except getting some of these other parts, which as a family therapist, there was a technique where you would ask certain family members if they could step back out of view, as this type of intervention they do in family therapy. So he would just ask the part if it could step back and would allow this other part to come forward, or the client's self, as he started discovering and kind of classifying what that is. But the other 4 therapies are powerful transformative therapies, and I've done life-changing work with clients using those other 4 therapies. And if you resonate with one of those, that's awesome. Go with the one that fits you best. Again, the reason I'm edging out a little bit on internal and family systems is there's just something about it I've never been able to get to the depth. And when I say that, it's really saying something, because all 4 of these other therapies go really deep. But there's something about utilizing IFS, and again, in the way I do it with ADP, that just takes you to a level you can't get in any other way in my experience. And so if you're out there right now and you're wondering, what's going to fit the best for me, again, you can contact me, send me questions, things like that. I can help you clarify. Use those resources. The IFS book would be Internal Family Systems 2nd edition by Richard Schwartz if you want to learn more about it. There's a great new relationship book he has out called You're the One You've Been Waiting For. Freudian slip, I guess, there. And it really goes into like how we put the onus on other people, partners, to heal our parts, which cannot be done. But again, investigate, research. YouTube is a gold mine. There's people out there who are sharing their experiences with these therapies. Everyone can do every single one of these therapies. So a lot of times people will say, oh, I tried EMDR, I can't do it, or I tried brain spine, I can't do it, or I tried this therapy, I can't do it. You can do it. If you're a human being, you can do all these therapies. Sometimes there are blocks, and then either a client's parts could be resistant, or the therapist doesn't have enough experience with those blocks to help you navigate and overcome them. But you can do them all, do what fits best for you. But you have to do something experiential that has the capacity and the potential to create neuroplasticity. Otherwise, there's no real biological change that takes place. There's a unique thing with IFS, the unburdening process, that is something most other therapies don't do. They do some very corrective, reparative experiences and healing and releasing energy from the implicit memories. But like I said, I was able to help people with the training I did have at the time, but these things have been transformative. Check them out, find what fits best for you. If you have any questions, you can always reach us at hawkinscounselingcenter.com. We'll help you find resources, or again, give extension of the information I shared here today. Or if you want to sit down with my wife or myself, we'd be more than happy to. So as always, hope this video is beneficial to you. If you know anyone that could benefit from it, please forward it on to them. That's our sole motivation, is getting good information out, free of charge, that people can start to heal from. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.